James Kinney house was built in 1863. The outbuildings, which would be a summer kitchen, brick also, same time, smokehouse, a carriage house, a wooden coal house, all built in 1863, and the barn built in 1874, a building across the road built in 1835 to 1840. Yes, the farm is 560 acres, and 300 of it, my brother and I bought it in 1957, and just before we got it, the 85-year-old lady that owned it, sold the coal rights because she was told that she was probably never going to be able to sell that coal again, that the opportunity was there, and she better grab it now, and so she did, and she took less than 1/10 of 1 cent a ton for the coal.
Wow.
And we found, when we came to buy the property at a public auction a year afterward, that the coal had been separated, but we didn't know that at the time of the auction. It was not disclosed. Unfortunately for us, the contract she signed allowed them to do any kind of mining. It was not specified at all about water, and no mention was made in that coal contract.
Interesting.
But they supposedly covered their liability by saying that they could cause any and all damage to the surface without having to pay for it or restore it. That, of course, has been rescinded by Ohio law since, and they do have to restore your water, and they do have to repair your property to pre-mining conditions. Well, they started about the year 2000, I believe, and we immediately lost a good well and at one of our other farms, and we immediately lost a wetland. It was a very small, about 1/3 of an acre, and the wetland was important to us because it filtered water that came from quite a long area of Route 147. Well, we know that some of these have been going on. Some of these water sources were here 200 years ago because the first settlers here were in the late 1700s, and they utilized at least 2 of the water sources right here at the historic James Kinney farmstead. Some of the other water sources, well, one spring in particular we were watering 98 head of cattle from, and it was spring number 283, 18 gallon a minute the day before mining, which was in June of that year. The day after mining, nothing, is all gone. It is never recovered.
Wow.
And that spring hydrated a small wetland, which also is like the James Kinney farmstead. A part of the James Kinney farmstead, in fact, is on the National Register of Historic Places. That wetland has not been restored, has not been documented, and I see more recently that this has appeared in an application for a coal company to mine D360-24, which is about 4,000 acres north of here, and they're claiming that wetlands under my place were not affected, and that's simply not true. And our website, www.countrymilefarm.com, we had a blow-by-blow description of what happened, when it happened, what it looked like, and also the restoration that took place afterward.
Right.
But it is disturbing because this was not only a historic property, this was actually our home and our business. And taking the water took a lot of our business away. We were able to run 98 head of cattle in the back pastures here because of the water, and we've been relegated to 20 or 22. Just not enough water to take care of everything. We have only one drilled well that came back, and that was at the north end of the property. That was at a lower elevation. It was right next to a wetland, and whether the water went from the wetland into that well, we do not know, but that has returned. One spring was not affected, and that was not mined under. It was so that spring is still running, and although we don't use it for anything except wildlife, and we do lease that area for wildlife hunting. Here at the main part of the farm, none of the dug wells survived, and In fact, even the cistern was broken and emptied, but the coal company reluctantly had that repaired. They didn't think they had to because they said it was not a water source, but the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, through Dr. Richwine, said, yes, it's on the National Register and it needs to be restored just like anything else.
Right.
So they did, and they did restore that. But the dug wells are all dry. I will put it this way, it is stressful. Anytime that someone disrupts your personal life by your house, by your actual drinking water, by the way you make your living, it is definitely going to be stressful. We had water supplied on a temporary basis for some time by Ohio Valley Coal Company, by water buffaloes, these great big tanks in your yard. And this was far from satisfactory, especially for the cattle, because although they had a 4,000 gallon capacity, the water would freeze, the cattle would be thirsty. Cattle are having to come from half a mile away to go get a drink. That's not very conducive to good agriculture. They've now replaced that with underground water from the Belmont County Water and Sewer Department.
Okay.
I don't get a bill for that. They do pay for it.
Okay.
And they have put electric heaters in the tanks, but that only takes care of 2 pastures. We have the other pastures that they have not done anything with yet.
Okay.
After all these years. Yes, they wanted me to sign a contract, the actual water use as of today's prices for 20 years in the future, but they wanted to deduct 4 or 5 years off that they'd supplied water already. I rather had a little problem with that and told them that I did not have to pay for water before, I did not expect to pay for water in the future, and that they could pay for it ad infinitum. But the coal company still says they want a 20-year limitation, and they're saying that ODNR has written off on that, but in talking with ODNR they said no, this is not a regulation, this is not a law. 20 years in the future, at the end of that 20 years, that farm still has no water. It has no water. That devalues any piece of farm property, especially in this area, which is a grazing area. This is one of the best grazing areas in the world.
Right.
We have companies from Colorado, from Texas, from around the western part of the United States that come to eastern Ohio because we have grass. We have 40 inches of rain a year, and we generally have spring water for all those animals. I do not see any legality to a company or a government agency in taking my water. I feel that when I purchased this place, I purchased it with all the ability it had to be an agricultural unit and a domestic unit. I do not see why the state of Ohio would ever allow any company to take my water.